And the contractors and vendors, and this is important to realize, we have thousands of people who work for those who provide contracts to the federal government, are in jeopardy today and are not subject to any guarantee of being repaid after the shutdown ends. They are at tremendous risk. So Suzi, LeVine, and I, our director of the state's Employment Security Department, just met with a group of Washington leaders in a variety of businesses, from telecommunications to banking to public utilities to healthcare providers. And we were basically talking about what the non-governmental entities to do to cushion this problem. And I can, I'm pleased to say that we've had some leadership from private enterprise helping. And I'll just mention a couple. Tacoma Public Utilities is offering some flexibility regarding payment. CHI Franciscan and Providence are doing work to give waiver of certain co-pays. Northwest Harvest has been benefited by Alaska Airlines. T-Mobile, Verizon, and Comcast are all having a variety of ways to provide flexibility for their customers. Permanente is providing flexibility for payment relief. And I know that's just a partial list of those who are helping their communities and families get through this problem. But it is not a permanent or total solution for these families. And we know these are dedicated people who are dedicated to the mission of serving the federal government. We have Randy King here today, a former park ranger, Mount Rainier National Park, was just talking about the people he's worked with for years that are one of our most beautiful national parks that are now unable to do their work, and the ability to hire people in the upcoming spring and summer seasons now is already in jeopardy. So we are going to probably have some difficulties providing national park services. We are hearing individual stories about these terrific strains on families across the state. An air traffic controller who is unable to receive maternity leave benefits. A park ranger who helped in the Oso landslide who is not able to retire. A worker in Spokane who actually has resorted to selling plasma to get gas money to be able to drive to a job this person's not being paid for. If there is a greater outrage, I can't imagine what it is. So our state and business leaders are coming together, and now the state of Washington today, we are announcing a new plan to help our families through this troubled time. We're announcing today that our Washington State Department of Employment Security is expanding unemployed benefits in the state to federal workers who are deemed essential. These are workers who have been directed to work full-time but are not receiving their pay. This includes TSA agents, Coast Guard personnel, Border Patrol agents, food safety inspectors, FBI agents, and many others throughout the family of federal workers. Now, up to this point, these people have not been able to have the benefits of unemployment compensation, and it has put them in extreme financial risk. We will now be able to service all 16,000 federal workers in Washington states who will be impacted. We think, and these are only estimates, that this will now allow us to serve the half of those 16,000 or thereabouts that have not been able to be served. So you can see this is a significant thing that could impact, and this is only an estimate, up to 8,000 workers in the state of Washington. By doing so, we will be joining a group of bipartisan governors in states in California, Colorado, New Mexico, and Vermont who are taking this needed step. And this is something that ought to resonate nationwide. We know that people have missed paychecks. They're facing real threats about rent, mortgages, credit cards, energy bills, phone bills, and car loans. And it was frankly unbelievably callous to hear Secretary Ross today that this is not a problem for people. It certainly isn't for him as a multimillionaire to say he could get credit to tide families over. That's not the way the real world works. The federal government sadly has failed these workers, so Washington is stepping up. It is unconscionable that the President of the United States has turned his federal workers into political pawns. And we will take care of Washingtonians where he will not. It is a sad day that a wall of vanity has been turned into a hall of shame coming out of Pennsylvania Avenue. So Washington State is going to act. With that, I'd like to introduce Suzi LeVine, who's exercised really great efforts to take care of this outrageous situation. Suzi.
Thank you so much, Governor. Thank you for your leadership on this, Governor, and thank you all so much for being here. These are really difficult times for federal employees in our state, and my team has been working incredibly hard 24/7 to identify options for all of those who have been affected by this shutdown. Our first preference, of course, would be an immediate end to this prolonged and painful shutdown, followed by federal protection for these workers. Absent movement on any of these options, I'm proud that we're taking this action to protect all of the federal workers who are affected by this and, who have been forced to work with no paycheck, no safety net, no ability to find alternative work during this time. This is the compassionate and responsible thing to do. We've assembled a team of 30 staff dedicated to taking these unemployment applications. Operators are standing by and have another team ready to help process them. People should visit our website, esd.wa.gov, and start applying for the claims for this system. That's what it's here for. It is a safety net for them. They can click on the picture of a federal worker affected by the shutdown. We also want to remind businesses affected by the ripple effect of the shutdown that we're here for them as well. When we were hearing from former Ranger King about the effect on Rainier National Park, we heard about those vendors who are in the park who are having to lay people off because they don't have the business that they ordinarily do. Well, those businesses can avail themselves of a couple of unemployment insurance tools, one called Shared Work, where we basically will supplement the pay with unemployment insurance, and one called Standby, which helps with retention, where those individuals will receive unemployment insurance, but they won't have to do the job searches. And so essentially, as long as there's a promise of a job, once business kicks back up into gear, that is a tool available for employers to take advantage of. Both of these are not just available in Washington State, but they are available across the country for businesses in other states as well. These are just a few of the resources that we have in our communities and across state government. For example, the Thurston County United Way is activating its emergency assistance fund. Our state combined fund drive is supporting charities who help support our safety net. And businesses across our state, as you just heard, are stepping up to provide help. These are tough times affecting thousands in our state and pulling millions out of our economy each week. So we're proud to be able to support in some way with this partial wage replacement, but there's still more to do. We look forward to the end of the shutdown soon.
Yeah, I do want to note that this, as Suzi said, this is a partial wage replacement. It's on the average of perhaps 50% of wages. So this does not solve all the family's total problems. But it is the right thing to do, and it is going to give substantial relief to Washingtonians in the hopes that this madness gets resolved. Questions?
Governor, had you gotten a response to your joint letter that was sent to the Trump administration last week seeking eligibility clarification, or did you decide to move ahead based on other states moving ahead?
We did receive a response. I would characterize it as somewhat muted, and after reading it and also reading between the lines, we concluded this is the right decision and ought to be unchallenged because it would be grossly unconscionable for the Trump administration to refuse to pay federal workers and then try to stop the state from trying to make up for that loss. I cannot believe that any administration would take that position. So it is our belief that there's reason to believe this will succeed in plugging that gap. I cannot imagine anyone being able to give a rationale that I'm going to be the President of the United States, insist people to work, not pay them, and then prevent a state from trying to help those poor victims of that policy from getting through this problem. So we feel pretty good and confident about the position we're taking. and we're pleased to take this position.
And can you repeat the list of the other states that have moved forward? And have you talked to the governors in those states to see if they've started the process already?
California, Colorado, New Mexico, and Vermont. My understanding, those policies are in place. They are receiving applications. I've not talked to those governors. All I know is they're totally right because they agree with me. So that's good news.
Governor, so in essence, these would be basically no interest loans to be paid back once they get their money back.
Well, we don't technically classify it by that, but that's the way it works out. And it's something that I'm pleased Suzi has jumped right in to make this available. Those phone lines are open, right, Suzi?
Yes, they are.
So they're open. We're in business. So we encourage people to avail themselves of this.
So no extra taxpayer money?
No, and the general fund is not involved in this. This is financed through the Unemployment Compensation Trust Fund. So the general fund is not involved in this financing system.
Because Congress has passed legislation ensuring back pay to those individuals, it gives us that much more confidence that we'll receive that back pay once they've gotten it. That said, we also understand that individuals may not be able to pay it all back at once. And so we will work with them on the payment plans that work best for them and for their expenditures.
How many have already applied for this, do you know?
In terms of furloughed workers, we have about 2,100 that already have applied, most of whom are already receiving it. We have a few dozen who applied within the past week, but 2,100 to this point is our approximate number.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, these are 2,100 furloughed workers who were not essential, so they
Correct.
were not working. They applied.
Correct. At the outset, there's this distinction between those who have been furloughed and are not working, who thereby have been deemed eligible for unemployment insurance, and those who have been deemed essential and are working. And so today's announcement opens it up for everyone.
Governor, do you need any legislation or formal policy changes for this? And if not, why did you wait until now?
Well, we've talked to the legislative leadership. They're supportive of moving in this direction. We'll talk to them to see if there's an interest in any technical corrections. But this is necessary for us to move now because people have their rent and food needs right now. We need to take action. We wanted to see how the administration responded to our inquiry. And once we saw that, we thought that this was the appropriate decision given our options. And I think we've both responded with an appropriate degree of compassion and reason and common sense, that it is common sense that governors do not force people to work without getting paid. Now, that's a pretty simple proposition. And if Donald Trump won't do it, we're going to do it. And I think it's consistent with both Republicans and Democrats' belief about this system. Both Republicans and Democrats who work for the government will be benefited by this. And I have to believe that both Democrats and Republicans believe this is a fair thing to do.
What are the options, other options you were considering as you were looking through this?
Well, we've asked our agencies to look, are there things we can do to provide some flexibility on those who work with the state government? We haven't actually found anything in that regard. So this is the biggest thing we could do by a factor of 100 probably for these families.
So for an individual, like for an example, a TSA agent, start to finish, if they were to call up right now, how long would it take? What should they expect they should encounter? And what are you going to tell them about? If you get 50% of their wages, what are you going to tell them about? You have to pay the state back.
So there's a calculator that will help individuals understand exactly what they'll be able to receive in terms of this wage replacement. Somebody who calls in today can expect, we typically set expectations around 2 to 3 weeks. But since this shutdown began, the team's been averaging 10 days. There's a required what's called a waiting week. So there has to be a week, and plus on top of that, there's been 2 to 3 days that it's been taking. So in general, we would set people's expectations between 10 days and 2 weeks for when they'd be able to get their first check. Now, that first check will also be backdated to when they last worked. So if that was December 27th, they will get paid back to December 27th with this unemployment insurance check. Does that make sense? I just want to make sure.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
So that could be 50% of what they would have earned from December 27th.
Again, the calculator, in general, it varies in terms of what percentage of their wage it will be. But the maximum benefit that people can get on a weekly basis in Washington State is $749. So the benefit that they will receive really depends on what their wage is, and the calculator is up on the ESD website for an individual to determine how much that is. Like I said, we will be able to backdate their claim so that if they file today, their claim will apply all the way back to when they last were working. And so that is their expectation. There's a team who's ready to receive their calls, and we have been handling thus far the furloughed workers, and the situation that they're within is quite similar, where we're prepared to do manual wage verification and where we are processing them. In terms of setting their expectations around back pay, the rule that has now been filed, going back to your question from before, we have filed the rule this morning. The rule indicates the importance of that they will need to pay us back. And we are making sure that when we have our first communications with them, that they understand that there is that expectation that they will pay us that back pay back so that we can reimburse the trust fund.
And then if the government opens within that time period when their first check is being processed, does it just cancel, or do you move forward with paying and then an immediate restitution, or what happens if the government opens in 5 days?
That's one of those things that we're going to handle if and when it happens. I hope it happens, because that would mean that the shutdown is ending. So let's hope that that's the case, and we will manage that at that time. Again, it's a lot of manual processing, and we have a team very dedicated to this, both the process of the claims as well as then getting the recoupment of those funds from them.
Governor, this wouldn't be necessary if Democrats would simply vote to give the president the wall he wants and reopen the government. So why is it so important for Democrats to hold firm?
Well, I think both parties have an obligation to fulfill what I have to believe is an American creed that both parties ought to be able to honor, which is you do not require people to work in this nation and not pay them a wage. Now, both parties ought to fulfill that mandate, come hell or high water. And so both parties ought to vote for this bill that's going to be on the floor today or tomorrow that's going to reopen government and get these people paid for the work they do today, and then they can go argue about border security during that period of time. Lots of arguments about border security. Democrats believe in border security too, but they don't want to waste $5 billion that could be spent on people's health care and early child education for a wall to satisfy Donald Trump's vanity and ego out in the middle of the desert that doesn't do anybody any good. So I think both parties ought to open up government, get these people paid, and then we can have a honest discussion about border security. That's the only right thing to do. By the way, I want to point out, too, why this position is necessary. Look, if we had a private employer in the state of Washington that was trying to force people to work and not pay them, that CEO, if they weren't in jail, they'd at least probably be subject to gigantic fines. And it would take about 30 minutes to solve that problem. In this case, we got a president of the United States that is immune from that, unfortunately, because the federal law preempts our state enforcement of these general protections that would protect any other employee in the state of Washington. So if he was a private employer, I'm telling you, he'd be either out of business quickly, and I don't know if it's a criminal violation, but it probably ought to be. So we're doing the best we can with the resources available to us now, and we will continue to do so. Thank you very much.